Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. My friends have been telling me to try 1 to 48 scale Tamiya kits for quite a while, and finally I decided to give in and try this Tiger one, of course as I said from Tamiya, and really see what the hype is all about. So let's get right into building this bigger than usual kit of this beautiful machine. Of course, I start by cutting out the parts out of the sprues using my sharp side cutters. Tamiya 48 scale kits come with weights to them. The other kits came with weighted holes that were metal. These ones only come with generic weights that you can choose to not add if you don't want them, but I decided why not, and they actually do give quite a nice heft to the model. Another really nice feature that Tamiya puts into their 48 scale models are these polycaps. This is essentially rubber that you put in between the sandwiched wheel parts, and this will help you to keep the wheels perfectly removable. Of course, this is a running gear of a World War II German tank, and a Tiger at that, which is probably the worst one apart from the mouse, I guess. However, it came together pretty nicely, and if you follow instructions you shouldn't have any issues building it together. I decided to glue all the wheels together into one big assembly, just so I don't have any bother later, and of course I kept them removable from the hull. The tracks were laid out on a flat area and I just put some glue in between them. They are Lincoln length, so I decided to make them into a generic sub-assembly that's removable from the hull. Again, I laid them out on a flat surface, added glue in between the links, and once it was somewhat dry I started wrapping them around the wheels and the running gear to give them their supposed shape. Then I just kept it like this to dry without gluing them to the wheels, and I just continued on with the hull. I don't wanna really bore you with the assembly. This is a Tamiya kit, and even though I've only built one Tamiya kit in the past, it was a kit from 80s, and this really did show me a little more how modern Tamiya is, and I do understand where the hype is about. The fit is amazing, but the detail, not the best. Of course, this is another thing that people actually praise. These kits are really easy to modify and up detail. That's definitely what I did here, and I wanted to take the biggest advantage of it. So let's start with some armor textures. First of all, I removed the included welds in the kits because they were worse than on the 72nd scale Vespid ones. They were really shallow and had almost no detail, and they weren't in all places they were meant to be. However, they are a great guide to create some grooves for the welds that I'm gonna add myself, which is something I'm gonna be doing for the second time, for the first time in such a big scale, and this is one of the reasons I was so excited. As mentioned, the hull did have the welds on only the sides. The turret had no welds at all apart from one running across, so I removed that one and also used the top part of the turret as a guide to create a groove around the side. Then the first armor texture, the easiest one of course, are weld cuts, and this is really easy to do. All you need is a scalpel, or if you want to speed up the process a little bit you can use a saw, and basically you just do a lot of cuts into corners of armor plating to create the effect where the armor plate was cut in real life. This is a nice little texture, the easiest one, and it can be then followed by some armor texture. Now in 1 to 72nd scale I probably wouldn't do this, but here I wanted to make the thing look really heavy. This is a heavy German tank, a legend, of course, it's a Tiger. I decided to heavily dilute Tamiya grey putty. This is the usual procedure for most modelers, and I just gently stippled it onto all the armor platings, which were thicker than 20mm, which I don't think anything is 20mm on this huge thing. I might be wrong, correct me in the comments, definitely not baiting you to interact with the video. Anyway, once this was done on all the thin plates, I used a heavier paste on the mantlet because that was the one part that was actually cast, and you can see it even on the Tiger 131. So I did want to represent this. The sides actually just kind of disappeared after paint, but I was happy that I actually did it. This is quite a, you know, model differing technique, and I love doing it. I'm really excited to do something with a heavier texture in this scale. I decided to do some impacts as well. This was done after the texture, felt a little more realistic. I just drilled out the hole, then I filled it out with undiluted putty. So once it was filled out with this putty, I just pushed it out with back of my brush, and this created a nice effect of pushed out steel by a shell. I did only 3 of these across the vehicle, just to give more interest and some more weathering in the painting stage. I also sanded down the sides a little more, just so they aren't that rough. This was rolled steel after all, German rolled steel at that, and this is probably the reason why it completely disappeared. Once this was done, the model was looking pretty professional, I must say. It was time for welds. Now in the past I used green stuff for welds, I only did this once on video on the E50, it didn't go the best, so this time I decided to go the good old route. I used the Tamiya epoxy putty, the yellow one that everyone knows when it comes to modeling community. I mixed it together and rolled out really thin snakes of it on a plastic sheet. I completely flooded it with water to make sure it doesn't stick to anything. Of course, it would be better to use a baby powder or maybe even flour, but I didn't have baby powder on hand and I wasn't sure if flour would work, so I just used water because I knew that would work. Once I had a really thin strip of this putty, I started pushing it into the grooves where I saw fit or where the reference showed a weld. I didn't put this everywhere. I was actually kind of disappointed. I wanted to try putting it around some additional details, but there weren't many. I did add it around the holders for the smokes, but here on the hole I just pushed it into the hole. This is why the groove is so good, because it gives you a nice deep part to put the putty, because the welds are usually sunken under the surface, they aren't on surface. Not always, but usually. Then I created the jig, or well, the tool for making the weld texture. This is essentially the same tool as Night Shift uses. It's a toothpick that has a piece of can wrapped around it. Guess where the can came from? I'm gonna give you a hint, it's in the last video. Anyway, I wrapped it around the toothpick, of course I glued it, and I started pushing into the putty to create the U-shaped welds on the vehicle. I tried using reference to see which way the U was actually facing. It might not be the most accurate, but I don't care, I really like how it looks. Of course, this time I started actually licking the toothpick just so it doesn't get stuck to the putty, doesn't tear the putty out of the hole. It's better to lick it because your saliva works even better than water. But here you can see the entire vehicle welded where I wanted welds. Of course there are some that I left out, but I was really happy with the result. The rest of the assembly was just normal Tamiya. I don't really need to show you anything. I didn't buy any aftermarket products, which was kind of a mistake, but let's just get right into painting. First step was priming the model with a black primer from Vallejo. This is the usual step that I do every time, but this is the vehicle that ate most of my primer up. I made sure I sprayed everything just so it doesn't show the bare plastic through, and so everything is in unified color, which will make it easier to paint. I should have sprayed those weights as well, because they show through the back ventilation. Now, the base color I chose was German grey. I really love tigers in German grey, and I know it wasn't really that usual. Maybe only the prototypes and the really early runs were grey, then they started being Dunkelgelb. But I really like how it looks. I love it in War Thunder, etc. So I decided to basically do what I did on my Stug, but not cover it in really bad whitewash. I started with a normal color out of the bottle, and then I started doing my typical post shading method that I love so much. I started adding a little bit of white to the mixture, continuously lightening the color as I went forward, and I started highlighting the highlighted areas of the vehicle. My method is, if it's a horizontal part of the vehicle, I spray towards the middle, so if you have a square, I spray towards the middle, and if it's a vertical part, I spray towards the top where I would expect the vehicle to get light shined onto from sun or anything else. And I simply proceed to add lighter and lighter layers, and with each lighter layer I spray more towards the middle, so there is a nice graduation towards the lightest color. I pushed this effect really far, really unrealistically, but I really liked how it looked, and it's important to push it really far because, as you will see later, it can disappear completely. So I pushed it really hard, so hard in fact, I mixed even lighter color and I picked out all of the tiny details like rivets and like handlebars and even some little doors on the surface and edges. I actually did some edge highlights. I don't see that done very often, but I realized that the edges are textured with the flame cut texture and I wanted it visible with a wash, so I decided to make it even lighter with a really light paint and a paintbrush, and this really made all of those tiny details pop. Then it was time for all of the detail painting. I started by painting the rubber parts on the wheels, because this is the early version of the Tiger that still had the rubber on its wheels. So I painted this with black, picking it out with a thinnest brush that I had, making sure I don't paint the actual wheel. On the whole, all of the rusty or metal areas were painted with a dark rust from Panzer Aces from Vallejo. It's an acrylic color, and I added it across the entire tracks, the spare tracks, and the tools, and the tow cables, and everything that I thought would be rusty. And for the wood areas, again, they were base coated with brown, but I added a lot of little stripes of buff to create a wood effect on the wood areas. It's the most pronounced on the jacking block, and I must say I was pretty happy with the effect. Then, after all of the varnish was applied, I applied a flat varnish, or well, matte varnish onto the vehicle. I started adding a enamel wash. This is a dark brown enamel wash for grain vehicles from AK. It was diluted using a odorless enamel thinner. I was using the Abteilung 502, and I just added it around all of the details, especially around all of those little textures that I created, and I blended it around with a enamel thinner. This is a very transformative process because it makes the vehicle look HD basically, but it actually makes it also look way darker, and this is one of the reasons why I overdid the post shadings effects, and as you can see here, it looks pretty HD and pretty cool, and I'm pretty happy with the result. So let's continue with the rusty areas again, basically starting with a weathering. All the rusty areas got a stippling of really diluted light rust Vallejo acrylic. Again, it's Panzer Aces, and this made them look quite rusty in my opinion. And then I started with some chipping. Again, dark rust from Vallejo Panzer Aces. Using the thinnest brush that I could, I was simply painting chips everywhere that I thought the vehicle would get beaten up. I did definitely overdo this, but I was still pretty happy with the result. On the shell impacts, I completely covered them in this color and then used them to just create some shrapnel effect around the shell impact, because this is something that I would expect would happen, just bits of steel flying everywhere, and all of those rust effects then got a layer of enamel wash, light rust wash, just to blend them together with the remaining surfaces, and it was again blended with a enamel thinner. This way I could also create some rust streaks running from those biggest chips. And there are definitely way too big chips, because I don't think you would get a chip the size of your palm on a vehicle, but whatever. Then the most rewarding part of this entire project was picking out all of those welds with silver color. Welds don't rust, they only silver if they get weathered. This is something I wanted to replicate. Of course, you would have to walk off on them quite a lot to get them this shiny, but I don't really care. I just wanted to pink them up, and I started pinking them up, and I was really happy with the result. This is a really nice effect that made the vehicle look really heavy. A heavy tank deserves some heavy mud effects. I decided to do this with a Vallejo acrylic mud. I simply stippled it everywhere that I thought mud would get accumulated on a vehicle going through, let's say, Eastern Europe, because this is an early Tiger, so let's say either Africa or Eastern Europe, and with this camo skin, probably Eastern Europe. I decided to make it really heavily muddy. You'll see why. I blended this with water, since it's an acrylic product, and I just don't want a huge sudden clump of mud, dark mud, because that's really hard to cover with paint. Then some pre-dusting. I used heavily diluted Deck 10 for this, and I covered basically everything that I would expect to get dusty, so that includes the entirety of the tracks, the lower hull, and of course the upper hull as well, around the turret, where dust would simply get accumulated the most. Then to enhance these techniques, I decided to use enamel effects. This is the first time I'm using enamel effects, and I've been wanting to use them for quite a while, because I've never been the most satisfied with my mud effects on my vehicles. I think that's the weakest parts of my projects, and this really enhanced that. These enamel effects were applied everywhere. I would expect mud to accumulate, at least these Africa dust ones, and they were blended with an enamel thinner. This really elevated the model to a higher standard. I was really pleased with these dust effects. They allowed me to make some insane streaks, and I just proceeded to enhance them with some artifacts, again from AK. I added them everywhere I would expect mud to get not as dry, so that's middle of the tracks, and also the mud clumps on the lower hull that I added. This was again blended with an enamel thinner, but first I had to give the dust layer a lot of time to dry, because the enamel thinner would simply reactivate it if I didn't. This effect definitely enhanced the model quite a lot, and I was almost considering to keep it like that, because I was really happy with how it ended up looking, but of course I had to add some really heavy wet mud, and I used dark mud enamel for that, and I just added it around all of those wettest, biggest clumps of mud that I could find, that I created basically, and around the insides of the wheels, for example, just so I can make the vehicle look really gritty. And I'm really happy that this got completely covered by the running gear, but I know that it's there, and you know that it's there as well. I also experimented with some streaks. I thought that would look pretty good. I actually realized here that the mud should be on the bottom as well, but that doesn't matter. Here you can see me adding it around the insides of the wheels. That's where the mud would stay and wouldn't get flung off. Last thing I did, I simply painted all of those metal to metal parts with silver, so the clads on the track that would get, you know, polished by the ground they were running across, and also the teeth on the sprocket that would get polished by the track running across it. And this is where the project was done. So, the little big tiger, my first 48 scale model, is finished. I must say I really enjoyed it. I was quite opposed to 48 scale, more or less mainly Tamiya, because I found these kits kind of underwhelming from my viewing perspective when I was watching videos about them. And I must say I was kind of wrong. The build is amazing. It's just such a good feeling to build this model. But as Night Shift pointed out when I sent it to him, it's, for example, missing photo edge, and that's one of the things that really drags these vehicles down. For example, this was my first 48 scale, so I didn't really want to do all of the tool clamps and everything. I would only get photo edge for the engine intakes, and at that point it just wasn't worth it. So the kit does feel kind of incomplete, but the scale is great. The kit is great. I really recommend it. If you're a beginner modeler, this is an amazing kit. It's really simple, it's really great. I really like it. It went together perfectly. I was just so happy with it. And I'm really happy with the result. I think this ended up being my best model yet, even though it's not the one that won me my first cup apparently, but I'll get to that into some other video. Anyway, you are the judge of this. I'm sorry I was not uploading for a while. I don't know what happened, but here I am with a Tiger, one of the most legendary vehicles out there, and my best model. And of course, you are the judge of that. So let me know down in the comments what you thought about this video and what you think about this Tiger. Should I do more 1/48 scale vehicles? I think they're pretty fun. Maybe I could try some other companies. Give me ideas down in the comments. Anyway, this was Peter. This isn't my outro, I don't know why I'm saying this. Go to my Patreon if you want to support me, give this video a like, subscribe and or comment, just so I can see that you enjoyed it. And I will see you next week or next time in another video. Bye bye!